I want to talk about the three things that I think get in the way of coaching at depth, and then what I call the three C's, which is sort of the big thing that I think really supports coaches to coach at depth. So let's get into it. Hello, Lyssa deHart here. And today I want to talk about an idea that I consider coaching at depth. Just so we're working on the same definition of coaching at depth, what I'm really talking about here is a way that I view my clients and the people that I work with. So I consider people mermaids, and I mean that in a very gender neutral way, but I believe that people are quite capable of going below the surface and really starting to explore the lower levels of the iceberg, if we were to use the iceberg metaphor. What a lot of coaching does is it stays at the surface level, at the waterline, looking at actions and results, actions, results. And what ends up happening is all the things that are driving those actions are a bit ignored by the coach. And I think there are three things that really lead coaches to not coach at depth, but rather stay at that surface level. And the three things are missed opportunities, situational focus, and really how the coach navigates strong emotions or even trauma. And so we're going to explore those three things, and then we'll take a look at the three C's that I think will support you in coaching a little deeper below the waterline. So let's take a look at the first one, which is missed opportunities. Missed opportunities can come about in multiple ways. One of the ways that I see missed opportunities show up when I'm looking at mentor coaching or doing ICF assessments is that the coach doesn't have a fully thought through agreement setting with the client. They may have gotten the topic and they may even have an outcome measure, but they haven't explored what is meaningful or important to the client about the topic. So the client comes to them with a topic and they say something to the effect of, what would you like to work on today in our coaching conversation? The client says, I'm starting a new business and I'd really like to explore some of the stumbling blocks that I'm noticing as I'm pulling my business together. And the coach jumps right into the coaching and says, tell me more about your business. At this point, this is a real missed opportunity for the coach and for the client to go below the surface. Because what's going to happen is, because the coach has asked this kind of question, the client is going to go into a long soliloquy about their business. They may tell you what it is that they're doing. They may tell you what they're, as far as I'm taking classes, I'm learning XYZ, this is my business idea, blah, 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 blah. And while all very interesting, isn't necessarily important to those stumbling blocks that the client said they wanted to explore through the conversation. Coaches will often finally get back to this particular deeper underlying issue towards the end of a coaching conversation, but that may mean that they've spent 20, 30 minutes having a conversation that wasn't all that useful, only to get towards the very end of the coaching call and to have this big aha about, there's maybe some stumbling blocks, and those stumbling blocks might be confidence or some other deeper issue. And so by not going below the surface, they've done coaching, but they haven't coached at depth. They've coached very much at the shallow end of the pool. So I think that having a really thorough agreement with a client where we not only explore the topic, but we really look at what's important about the topic, what's bringing it forward today, what would be different at the end of the conversation. And they may say something like, I'd have some tools on, how to navigate these stumbling blocks, or I'd feel more confident about the stumbling blocks that I'm dealing with. And the coach can even dig deeper with, and if you had tools, what would your experience then of this situation be different than the one that you're having right now? And the client might say something to the effect of, I'd feel more ease or more confidence, or whatever it is that the client is really talking about. But now we have the exploration of stumbling blocks that's leading the client towards confidence. Now the coach has a sense of what's really important here for the client that they're working with. And so this is one of the places where coaches, they have a choice point, and often they go with the topic choice point versus really diving below the surface of even the agreement setting itself and finding out what the deeper, more meaningful issue is and the deeper, more meaningful outcome. Not just a success measure, but we're reconfirming what's important about that success measure. And I think that's key. I think also a missed opportunity comes up in the sense that there are often themes that show up. I was just doing a mentor coaching session yesterday, and one of the things that was really clear was, as the coach was telling me about the client situation, the client is got a family member who's very, very ill, has a older pet that is coming towards end of life, and they're not happy with their work. And as the coach was talking about this, there was an underlying theme that seemed to emerge, which was a sense of helplessness, of not having control over all of these situations, not knowing what to do, feeling helpless about helping the family member, helping the dog, liking the job, changing the job. And so this really leads to some of the underlying themes that often show up in coaching, which have to do with feeling controlled or being out of control, being appreciated or not being appreciated, feeling overwhelmed. We hear this often comes up with, spinning plates, juggling full plates. I mean, we do lots of things with plates. And then I think another place that we have missed opportunities is when we are not present. And so if the coach is really focused on something that is getting in the way of them being fully present, whether it's maybe some sort of argument they've just had, or a bill that's due, or some timeline that they're really struggling with, or even worried about the fact that they're recording a coaching call and now they're trying to be perfect. These sorts of things will take us out of presence with what the client says. And it's very difficult to go to depth when you haven't actually heard the words your client is saying to you. So this is all part of this first piece, right? Of how do we, these missed opportunities that get in the way of us coaching at depth. The second piece that it really leads to us being at the surface versus at depth in our coaching is a situational focus. And so I'm going to go back to the little scenario I gave you a minute ago, where the client says, I've got this business and I've got a few stumbling blocks, and I want to kind of explore those stumbling blocks. And the coach says to the client, tell me more about your business. So while this is also not hearing the stumbling blocks and kind of stepping over the stumbling blocks, what it also is a situational focus. The situational focus shows up anytime the client shares with us something that's going on and we start to ask them details about the situation: who, what, when, where, why, right? Like, these are kind of the situational focus indicators. Tell me more about your business. Tell me more about this problem. Tell me more about your boss. Tell me what you think your boss should do. Anything that puts the person outside of their own internal experience and into the situation, and now we're trying to solve the situation, becomes a situational focus. And these who, what, when, why, where can be very interesting, and yet it's not important for the coach to know all the situational elements in order to coach at depth. So if I had, in the example of the client who had the stumbling blocks, of what we do is we begin to explore below the surface. As you hear yourself say stumbling blocks, are there any particular stumbling blocks that seem most important for us to begin to explore today? And the client will say whatever that is. And then we're getting a linkage towards, and what would be different if we fully explore that particular stumbling block? And the client says, I'll have more confidence and I'll feel more ready to move forward with my business. So then what we're doing is we're getting down to what's important. We're navigating stumbling blocks towards feeling confident. So again, I'm not focused on the elements of the business. I'm not really going to be focusing in my questions on all the different elements of each particular stumbling block, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite the client to begin to name the stumbling blocks. And they are going to then tell me about what stumbling blocks are most important to them. But as they're talking, I'm not listening for the situation. I'm listening to those underlying threads or themes that might be showing up. Feeling lost, not feeling confident, feeling overwhelmed, feeling not appreciated, not having control, feeling helpless, right? Like I'm listening for themes. And anytime I'm listening for themes, I can check my hypothesis with my client and say, I'm hearing a theme that sounds a little like X, and I'm curious, as you hear me say that, what shows up for you? This is how we invite the mermaid below the surface, right? And so the mermaids are going below the surface. We are also being mermaids because we're asking questions that are bringing the client below the surface. So the second thing that gets in the way are really the situational focus elements. The third area that really stops coaches from going to depth has to do with strong emotions and sometimes trauma. So I want to just, for clarification, I'm not talking about doing trauma coaching because that is a specialty that requires a great deal of training. I personally, as a recovering therapists, have a bias about trauma coaching. I really believe that it requires a therapist who really knows how to set the container of safety, because depending on how big the trauma is, the client may start talking about the trauma and get sucked into the trauma and not know how to get out, which keeps people from actually doing the trauma work that they need to do. So I highly recommend, if you have a big T, huge trauma, that's something that a skilled, specialized therapist probably is the best resource for that particular client. On the other hand, we all have small T traumas that show up in our life. And so traumas will sometimes show up as strong emotions. So it may be like an ongoing traumatic relationship with a family member or with a boss that reminds us of a family member. These are places where coaching can be very useful for a client to explore. And I want to talk a little bit about the past, because I know for a lot of coaches, we hear this idea of therapy is in the past, coaching is in the future. And there's a yes and here. All things that just happened are in the past. Everything I've just said up to this point didn't happen at this moment. It happened in the past. And so we're talking about it now, even though the client's stumbling blocks are things that occurred in the past. And so I don't want you to be afraid of the past versus the future. But in coaching, what we want to do is we really want to say, I'm hearing this trauma of whatever the trauma is. And I wouldn't call it a trauma. I would just name it. I'm hearing the frustration of this boss who reminds you of your dad. And I'm curious, what would you like to do with that? So what we want to do is we want to link whatever that trauma or strong emotion is to the future state that the client has already stated in the agreement setting that we did earlier, right? They are linking it to where they want to go, so that we may talk about the things, the strong emotion that showed up in the meeting yesterday or last week or a year ago that keeps coming up, but we're linking it to what the client wants to be moving towards. And so we need to know what the client wants to be moving towards. That way, we're not doing trauma therapy, we're doing trauma-informed or strong emotion-informed coaching. And we're moving, like, if you feel really angry, what is the experience you'd rather be having in this situation? And an example of that is a client who came with a work situation where they discovered that because they didn't grow up within the organization, there's probably not a lot of upward mobility for them within the organization, and the disappointment that came up as a result of that. And it showed up as a pretty strong feeling of, I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy enough to be even considered for future growth within this organization. And at that point, it's like, what would you like to be then in regard? How would you like to feel differently in regard to the situation that you find yourself? And the client said, I'd like to be at peace with it until I can find a new position that has opportunity. So then is that what we're doing? We're exploring sort of this place of stuckness towards moving into a peaceful place. Yes, that's what I'd like to be doing. How do you want to begin the exploration towards peace? And then that way, the coach is taking the situation that happened in the past, last week, whenever, and helping the client to determine how they would like to move it forward into the future. So these are the three. Well, and one more thing about strong emotions. I really think strong emotions are important. And I don't mean for the coach to ask a client, I noticed that you seem to be really upset right now. How does that feel to you? Because they're going to be like really upset. So it's not about asking them how the strong emotion feels to them necessarily. That might work depending on the situation, but it's more, what is that strong emotion telling you? So if I'm feeling really angry and somebody asks me, what is the anger telling you? I'm going to have to stop and think about, what is that anger trying to tell me? It might be a situation, going back to themes, it might be a situation in which I'm allowing people to cross my boundaries. Or maybe I don't even have any boundaries and I haven't set them up because I thought people wouldn't step over that boundary, so I never named it. Or maybe I have an unrealistic expectation of myself or others, and it's making me really frustrated because they're not living up to this expectation, which I maybe have never even acknowledged to myself. So these strong emotions really can tell us something important. Even strong emotions like sadness and even strong emotions like excitement and enthusiasm, right? These emotions can tell us something. They're doorways into awareness. And so a coach can really use them to invite the client to explore what the emotion is trying to teach them or tell them, or showing them what is important to them. And so that's what I'll say about the third piece, which is, strong emotions and trauma, and how avoiding those things keeps us from going into depth in our coaching. So let me switch gears real quick for us. I think the three C's, as I like to call them, that support us to coach at depth really have to do with compassionate detachment, courage, and curiosity. And so what I mean by compassionate detachment is that I adore my clients and I want the very best for them, but I have to separate my idea of my value as solving their problems into my value is holding the space for them so that they can explore their own values, their own journey, so to say, and holding that space so that I don't have an agenda for them. I'm detached from their outcome, but I'm not detached from my compassion for them and my curiosity on behalf of their growth and learning. That is the place where I want to be compassionate and engaged and present, but not with their outcome. So compassionate detachment is huge in allowing us to go to depth, because at that point, then I'm not going to be driving the client towards a particular outcome. I'm going to be in a state of open-minded wonder with them, which really leads into curiosity, right? Which is, I want to be able to have a curiosity because I have a unique perspective from outside of their experience. I can look at their experience from multiple different directions, and everything that I know can inform my curiosity. So again, the client with the stumbling blocks they want to explore, I can say, talk to me more about the stumbling blocks that are important to explore, and the client will begin to tell me. And then as they're saying that, I might hear something, and I might hear one of those underlying themes. I'm going to just say this word: confidence is showing up as you're talking. And I'm curious, as I say confidence, how does that show up for you, or what shows up for you? In that way, I'm using what I know and I'm courageously testing a hypothesis, but I'm not attached to confidence being the thing for the client. I'm just asking and testing the hypotheses that I have based on how I'm experiencing the client. And it's in a way that the client cannot experience themselves. So it's super useful to people. And then the third piece of this, we've got the compassionate detachment, curiosity, and courage. It takes courage to be able to hold the space for another person to explore their own inner landscape, and us to be brave enough to walk with our hand on their shoulder and have them lead us through these internal spaces. It just takes courage. It takes us doing our own work. And I highly recommend that as a coach, what you are doing is you're finding a way to reflect on your own coaching. The way that I do it is Ray notes, because I can see what the client offered and I can then see what my question was in response to it. It's like a football player who throws a pass only to have it fumbled or have it miss its mark or have it intercepted. They're going to go back to the bench during the next play, and they're going to rewind that video, and they're going to start making some assessments about what happened and what went wrong in that moment. And I highly recommend that coaches maybe adopt a bit more of this self-reflective practice, because that's the place where courage then shows up. We become brave enough because we can hear those underlying themes. We can hear those important words that the client is sharing with us. And then we're brave enough to ask the really important questions that take our clients down below the waterline. I hope this was useful, and I hope to see you in another video. If you're interested in more videos, I have some links up here to coaching demonstrations, which might give you some ideas on how I myself coach around these same sorts of ways, getting my clients to depth. Cheers.